Yeah. You gonna use this or? I'm gonna try this mic out here. Are we getting sound on Zoom for our Zoom friends here? We can hear now. Great. Thank you very much, Deb and everyone. All right. Yeah, so thanks for, oh, sure. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, come on in. Oh boy. Yeah, so thanks for coming out, everyone, tonight. And for those of you joining on Zoom, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. As Anne said, my name is Casey. Myself and my wife Laura are new to the Valley. We just moved up here in August, and yeah, I did my PhD in snow algae, and I was at SFU and finished up a couple years ago. And yeah, I'm excited to sort of be sharing what a little bit about that mysterious world and what I was studying. So snow algae is also known as red snow or watermelon snow. And it's important because it's a part of our complex climate, but it's also a beautiful and complex ecosystem in its own right. So that's snow algae in the photo there. That's that pink stuff. And the photo doesn't really do it justice, but maybe some of you have seen it while you're out hiking. And it looks like blood was spilled in the snow. It's very striking. You might see like, it looks like fluorescent pink. Like it really, really grabs your attention. And yeah, so how I got into this was studying basically I'll be presenting to you my PhD dissertation without all the charts or numbers. So don't worry, this is just all the fun stuff here. So my thesis went all the way from microscopy to looking at cells from satellite. So on the top there, that's what the snow algae look like under the microscope. There are red ones, green ones, different shapes and little flanges sticking out of them. And then the image on the bottom there is the satellite view. So that's actually a mountain range. And those are glaciers flowing down from the mountains. The top of the glaciers being white, covered in snow. And if you look closely, you can see there's a little bit of pink there right at the bottom of the glaciers. So that's right between the snow and the ice. There's that pink snow. So tonight I'll be starting out with just a little bit of an introduction. What are snow algae? What are algae? And talk a little bit about their interesting relationship with meltwater and the implications for snow melt and for glaciers and climate and things like that. And then I'll get into under the microscope. What do these things look like? So talking a little bit about the different habitats that they're found in, all the different species and life cycles, and tell you a little bit about discovering a new species, which was a highlight of my research, and a little bit about what that actually entails. And then we'll go a little bit into the microbiome, all the various different miniature animals that feast on these algae high in the alpine. And then I'll talk a little bit about their distribution across the globe and why they're found in some places but not others. And then we'll wrap up. Should be hopefully 45, 50 minutes or so, and we'll make sure to leave time for questions at the end. But if a question does arise, feel free to raise your hand. Let me know. So what are algae? Algae is actually an informal term. It encompasses a huge diversity of organisms. So it's basically anything that's photosynthetic and not a land plant. So that includes everything from seaweeds to kelp, pond scum, algal blooms, plankton in the ocean, the little green guys that live inside of lichens, and as well as little green algae that live inside of corals as well, that are a part of that symbiosis. Yeah, so the algal bloom on Seymour Lake this winter was, I believe that was a cyanobacterial bloom, right? Yeah, so that's an example of an algal bloom. So evolutionary tree of life. Reminder that we live on a crazy diverse planet. So this is an evolutionary tree of all of life. Like something like 99% of it is all microscopic. So all of this is bacteria. Here's cyanobacteria up at the top there with the star. And then this branch shooting out, you might think it's all eukaryotes, but no, actually this is all things that are called archaea. They look like bacteria. And then just very little tip here includes eukaryotes. That's plants, animals, fungi, and algae. And zooming in on just the eukaryotes, so just that green circle there, I'm zooming in on that. And so very diverse. I'll just highlight the bilaterians. There's a little orangutan there, so we're down there. We're Episthecons, which I quite like. And there's fungi as well over there, and then the land plants. So algae pop up all over this. So there's not really a single group of algae. Algae is basically just anything that's not a land plant that does photosynthesis. So I starred all the little groups that are mostly algae. So more than half of them are algae of all these. And most of these this is not drawn to scale, by the way. These are little microscopic critters for the most part. So yeah, chlorophytes. So snow algae are chlorophytes. So I circled that in green there. And that group is massive as well. That group is about the same size as all of animals, excluding sponges and jellyfish. And then the chlorophytes. So chlorophytes are closely related to land plants. So these little algae guys that we're going to be talking about, that's sort of where they fall in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, they're these little tiny microscopic guys that grow on the surface of the snow. And we often think of snow as being like pure or devoid of life. And maybe to an extent that's true in the wintertime. But in the spring, it starts to melt and you get this perfect freshwater habitat. And you may have heard the phrase poor man's fertilizer. Snow is poor man's fertilizer before. That's because the snow contains all this yummy nutrients like nitrogen and things like that that are really good for plants. And it slowly releases it as it melts. So you've got this perfect setup for these tiny little, basically plants to grow on the surface. And oh yeah, I want to show you this. This is a little video I took of a snow flea eating snow algae. It's grazing there. So those are the crystals. Those are the little granules about, I don't know, 1 millimeter across or so, each one of those little granules. And they're so cute. It's yeah, I had a little like little plug-in to my phone there. So it's kind of zooming in. This one on the left-hand side is kind of like what it would look like if you looked very closely. That's little snow flea grazing is a little more zoomed in. And then in the very bottom right, you can actually see, if you look very closely, the individual dots. Those are the algae. So they're growing in this kind of liquid surface veneer on top of these grains of ice. Yeah. And I seem to have lost my clicker here. How do I do this? There we go. Yeah, so oftentimes you'll see the red snow forms in these kind of pits and troughs on the snow surface. And that's partly because that's where the liquid water is, but it's also because they're creating their own meltwater by virtue of being darker. So the red snow is darker than white snow. So I have a little animation here. So the light comes in, it hits the white snow, most of it bounces off, only a little bit is absorbed. But then the sunlight comes in, hits the red snow, and a lot more of it is absorbed by the snowpack. It's kind of like wearing a black shirt on a hot day. So yeah, they're contributing to create their own meltwater, and this releases nutrients from the snowpack. On the right side, you can see that it's actually melted. The red snow in that kind of trough there is actually melted right down to the blue glacier ice below that, and that will mean that that blue glacier ice is exposed to the air temperature and to the sunlight for longer, and so that's going to melt faster. So it does have effects on the glaciers as well. And as well as things like, so this is going to affect the snow melt, it's going to affect hydrology, things thinking about like stream temperature for salmon. That's the snow up at the upper headwaters with these algae on it. It's going to be affected by that, and that will affect the timing and the release and so forth. And since snow is the best reflector, shorter snow cover duration. So if the red snow melts faster, that means whatever darker surface is underneath it is going to be exposed for longer. So that means there's more, the Earth is darker and it's absorbing more solar energy. So that's an important feedback loop of climate. You've probably heard about Arctic amplification and things like that, or you may have heard of that before. So yeah, it's relevant to climate, but we don't know how much. But before we get into the climate connection, there had been a few studies in other regions of the world. Back in 2018, when I drove my van up from Arizona, where I was living at the time, and started grad school. And no one had really surveyed the snow algae species in British Columbia. So our first question was, what's out there? So I was living in my van, camping at trailheads, driving around the Vancouver, like lower mainland area, hiking up to collect snow samples in the morning, and then bring them back to the lab in the afternoon. And I would be so excited when I'd get these little tubes filled with red snow, have them in my little cooler in the van, and rush them off to under the microscope because I couldn't wait to see what they would contain. So first thing I noticed was that, and there was these different sort of communities across an elevational gradient. So down in the forest, one thing we saw was this orange snow, and it would oftentimes be underneath the conifer needles. And that's what it looks like under the microscope. So there's 3 or 4 different species there, but mostly those little orange guys with tiny little minuscule spikes. So that was a community that was very common in the forest. There was more spiky guys. This was in green snow. Sorry, the photo is a little hard to tell what's going on there, but that is a patch of green snow. And yeah, so these guys would be growing also in kind of wet areas, waterlogged areas of snow, typically at lower elevations. And that's a different species from the one before. But they both have spikes. We also found these kind of runnels. So a runnel is just like a drainage channel on the surface of the snow. And it's kind of hard to tell, but actually on the surface of it, it was orange. But then when I dug down with the avalanche shovel, there was this green streak leading all the way down to the bottom. And I actually dug one all the way to the bottom. It was like 1.5 meters of snow because this is the Coast Range, right? So it was cool to see that. So that's what they look like on the top. And then as you go lower down, you start to get greener and greener cells. Some of them are developing a little bit of pigment. There's a couple of little hungry amoeba-like things consuming some algae there. And you'd also see some with little flagella as well, zooming around under the microscope. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, these little orange patches, for some reason, these were always on the underside of snowbanks, but these ones are kind of football shaped. They had these like ridges running along the outside. You can see the green chloroplasts in the center there. But yeah, they've got that nice juicy yellow pigment that they're producing. And these were kind of at all elevations. And then up in the high alpine, that drier snow, you'd get these communities of little red spherical cells, which I attempted to emulate with my little snow algae cookies. They don't actually contain snow algae, so don't worry. But help yourself, they're in the back there, snow algae cookies. And these were, so one thing that was cool about these was you could actually smell it. So in like evening time, I found we were up in the Bugaboos, and there was like the cold air was settling down, and I walked into a patch of pink snow, and it smelled like artificial watermelon flavoring is the only way I can describe it. It was really weird. Um, so maybe that's how they got their name, is watermelon snow. So these communities of Clanamonas were found overlying alpine lakes. Kind of the image is a little washed out there, but that's a alpine tarn. Um, the little arrow there and pointing on the photomicrograph is showing it's got these four little swimmers on the back there, and they'd be cruising around like jellyfish. They were really pretty. So they were up in the alpine. Oh, here's a satellite image of some of the lakes. So this is somewhere in the Coast Range in June, and there's yeah, over on about halfway on the right side, there's a little pink lake there. Um, so yeah, they were really beautiful. They'd have like little cilia coming out of them. Some of them, maybe we thought this was maybe a life stage of that species, not really sure. And some of them would have these crazy spikes. These were massive cells. They had, and yeah, and oftentimes there'd be a diverse community with other types with them, green guys and red guys and orange guys. Just grab a sip of water here. So these little green guys are swimmers. So that's what they look like under the microscope. And they have two little flagella, and they would do the breaststroke. So they have this little wave motion, and they swim all over the place, quite fast. But one thing that an interesting paper came out last year that showed that this is actually these little swimmer guys are how they colonize the snow surface from last year's snow. So they'll swim all the way up, which it totally blows my mind because you think looking at a snowpack, you've got like these ice layers, and there's like sometimes the water is flowing through, sometimes it's not. There's little bubbles, and this little thing is like 20 microns, so like a fraction of a fraction of a hair's width in size, and it's making this migration up through like 2 meters of snow to the surface. Just absolutely incredible. Um, so yeah, they're swimmers. They're also aeronauts as well. So they have uh, the ability to get swept up by the wind. And this on the right side of that is what that looks like under the microscope. So it's this little glom with like, it's got conifer pollen, that's that translucent stuff there. You can see the little red cells. We called them little terraform packages because we liked the idea that there was this whole little community that was glommed into this little seed that would get swept up by the wind, and maybe it would land on some other snowfield over there and start a new colony. There was a cool paper that was looking at the genetics of like North Pole and South Pole snow algae, and actually found that there was genetically identical snow algae on the North and South Pole, which was very good evidence that they were getting swept up into high atmospheric currents. So the populations are actually connected across the globe, from one end to the other. So this is these little circular spherical sanguina guys. They're developing this red pigment. So I said they're basically plants, right? So they have the green in the center, and they're on the surface of the snow, and they'll use this red pigment like a sunscreen to protect their delicate photosynthetic machinery on the inside. The pigment is called astaxanthin. It's the same pigment that colors salmon pink. So the little salmon are eating little pink krill. The little pink krill are eating little, apparently pink astaxanthin producing marine algae. And so it bioaccumulates up the food chain. And there's also maybe other evolutionary roles for it as well. And it's a fat too. You can kind of see it's like on some of the greener cells, it's like little globs of that there. So it's like, put oil and water, the little glob there. Um, so yeah, that's astaxanthin. So this was sort of our broad survey, and we did some genetic work as well. looking across these populations in British Columbia. And one thing that kind of caught our interest was we kept seeing these cells, these spherical red cells that had these little like translucent protuberances coming out of them. They sort of looked like rubies encased in mother of pearl to me. And some French researchers back in the 1800s had made some illustrations of these. And they basically, since the 1800s, they've been thought to be a life stage of this common spherical red snow algae. And so we thought, well, why don't we go ahead and sequence the DNA of them, both of a spherical one and the little ruby encased in mother of pearl, and see if they're indeed the same thing. And they called them rosettes, by the way, I guess. So the rubies, rosettes, they sort of have that rosette shape to them. So yeah, we had to figure out how to get the DNA out of them. So this was like 2 years of trial and error. Basically, we had to manually go in with a little capillary tube attached to a syringe, and we isolated these cells from a field sample. And then we actually found that the best way to get the DNA out, because they're encased in these, like, they're a tough nut to crack. They're these really thickly armored. So we tried all the usual litany of ways of exploding cells, like, all these standard lab techniques. Nothing was working. The thing that ended up working for us was basically really stupidly low tech. We just stuck it between two pieces of glass in with sterile tweezers, sterile glass, sterile everything, and squished it, and all the red fat came out along with the DNA. So you can see the little squish marks there. So we did just that, and we sequenced the DNA, and we actually found that it didn't match anything, any known DNA records on a phylogenetic tree. So they formed their own branch. And we thought this must be a mistake. So we did it again, and we kept getting the same answer. It doesn't match anything in these databases. So we looked more closely. So we looked more closely at these things. We actually found there was 5 flavors of these little rosette guys. So the first ones had these sort of square protuberances. We called them cogs because they sort of looked like a little machine cog to us. Oh, and the images on the right-hand side, the black and white, that's like a 3D representation of the same cells in color there. So you can see like an A8, even though it looks like it might be otherwise, the little protuberances actually sort of look like they've been squished out of a pasta maker or something like that. So we called those cogs. We found, and the cogs we only found in the forest, but then we found these ones up on the glaciers, and they looked different. They had these sort of rounded, like floral-like shapes. We nicknamed those petals. We found these guys only in a couple of field samples, but they had these really cool stellation forms. We called them stars. These ones, we thought they looked sort of like a little planet or an asteroid or something, so we called them globes. And finally, we have these ones with a kind of reddish exterior, and we called them poppies because the red exterior of them. And the last 3 we didn't really find associated with any particular habitat, except maybe the globes were found in like kind of dirty mineral snow. So we found these 5 types. We sequenced hundreds and hundreds of these cells. We found consistently they all formed their own branch in the tree of life that didn't match any other records. Each of the 5 shapes formed its own subgroup. So we decided, based on that, they probably we're going to name them a new genus with 5 new species. So naming a species, what you have to do in case you ever need to know this information next time you discover a species, you have to submit what's called a holotype. So this is like the specimen. Like anyone wants to compare it to something else, they have to go to the UBC Beatty Biodiversity Museum records, and we've submitted these little samples that are mounted on silicone stubs, sprayed with iridium, and they're like preserved. And those are the standard by which all others are judged, I guess. And then we had to give them names as well. So we decided Rosetta would be fitting since they were historically called rosettes. And we called the cogs Rosetta castellata, which is sort of castellated ridges. The petals we called Rosetta floranivia, which means flower of the snow, kind of poetically. The stars, we weren't very original on that one. We called that Rosetta stellaria. The globes we called Rosetta rubratera, which means red earth. And the poppies we called Papavera, which means poppy. So yeah, we have these holotypes are at UBC, and we submitted all this genetic data to a big global database. So next time someone wants to study these, they can match it up and hopefully pick up where we left off, figuring out what the heck these guys are doing. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I've just been talking about the algae, which are lovely, but there's a whole diversity of species found in these communities, including little bacteria, fungi, microscopic predators, viruses. So this is just one example of like a single drop of this meltwater, and we put it on a microscope slide. And there's so much going on there. You can see some of the translucent stuff. The really small guys are like that guy right there is a little bacterial rod. Some of the bacteria will have these symbioses with algae where, like, for example, humans can't produce our own B12 vitamins. Well, it turns out algae can't produce them either. So they actually need a symbiotic algae or symbiotic bacteria to produce that for them. And then in return, that bacteria will eat on those yummy carbon mucousy exudates that the algae are producing. So yeah, algae have their own microbiome is what I'm trying to say, I guess. The fungi, so there is all sorts of crazy characters living in these blooms. This is one we called the three-armed bandit. It breaks off a piece of its arm and forms a new cell of itself, so it reproduces clonally. We had these chytrids that we kind of thought were like vampires. They stick their little straws into the cells and will suck out all their bits. The bottom image is just a different type of microscopy showing the chytrids sticking their little proboscises in there. Lots of these guys, ciliates zooming around. They have all their little propulsion tentacles paddling like mad. Yeah, they like to snack on the algae. So one time I got back from sample collecting, put the samples in the fridge, and left, go to sleep, came back the next morning, and all these cilia had just eaten all of my algae. They just were chock full of these little red algae cells on the inside. So very naughty. Some ciliates will host endosymbiotic algae within them, which I think might be what's going on here. So they have a little greenish tinge. So they'll farm out sort of like a lichen. They'll actually get these guys living on their insides. They'll produce sugar for them. There's also what's called kleptoplasty, which is where a ciliate will eat something, but not all of it. It won't eat the chloroplast, and it'll incorporate that into its own cellular machinery and keep them on for a little while and have them keep producing sugars for them. So stealing other people's chloroplasts. This is a fun one. Dileptus. So they have these toxic stingers on their trunk, kind of like an elephant. They hunt with a sweeping motion. And when they encounter something, they inject its prey with these toxins, and then they sweep it down into the mouth at the base of its trunk below the stingers. Rotifers, these little guys are filter feeders. Excuse me. So they have little cilia at their mouth entrance, and they'll be doing this and bringing all the little algae into them. You can see the algae are kind of tracing a line through their digestive tract there. And tardigrades, my favorite. Also known as water bears or moss piglets. They're famous for being able to survive desiccation for years. So they'll just fold up into like a little lump and go into a state of dormancy. And then you put a little water on them and they just like pop right back to life. And ice worms. And Jamie, I was thinking about our conversation about Dune the other day. I think of sandworms when I see these guys. If you're a little algae, you'd be terrified to have these guys coming for you. they're the largest multicellular animal to live their entire life cycle on the ice. And they're only found in this region in North America and in one small part of Tibet as well. So they're very cool. They swim up to the surface when liquid water is available, and then they'll sink back down below, like the sandworms. And the snow fleas, of course, very cute. They migrate up on sunny days. You probably have seen them before while you're out hiking. They have a little spring-loaded tail. They can jump 100 times their body distance. And one fun fact I found was, according to Google, was that they can live up to 5 years in captivity. And then, of course, there's this whole secondary realm of consumers that are feeding upon those predators. So you've got insects, wolf spiders. This is a gray-crowned rosy finch snacking on glacier ice worms up on Mount Rainier. And probably more than that, horned larks I've often seen as well. For those of you bird nerds out there, there's oftentimes snacking on the snowfields up in the Alpine. So switching gears here from the microscopic to the very large scale, this was on a climbing trip in the Bugaboos, and we're heading up Bugaboo Spire and got to the top and looked over on the other side to the Vowel Glacier there, and it was totally covered in pink snow. And this was just totally blew my mind. And you can't see it very well there, so I just darkened the image a little bit. Hopefully that's a little bit easier to see. So that whole center of the glacier is pink, and the glacier is flowing downhill. There's the nose of the glacier, and there's that little teardrop shaped pond at the tip. And this is the same glacier, but looking at it from a satellite view. So going left to right throughout the summer. And starting in July 18th, there's this big pink spot. And you can see there's the teardrop shaped pond just to orient you. And yeah, so this snow algae bloom persisted for like a good month until it had melted all the snow on the top of the glacier, leaving that bare ice exposed. In total, we did some crude calculations based on the satellite images and some other data, and we're able to estimate that the snow algae melted about 15 centimeters of the total snowpack depth. So in the, like whatever, a meter, 2 meter deep snowpack, that's not a ton, but it's not nothing either. So a substantial fraction. And that's important for the glaciers right at the equilibrium line, right at the center bit, because that's going to expose the ice for longer and the ice will melt faster. Yeah, I think it has to be above freezing for a little while for enough of the liquid to sort of saturate the snowpack. So however long that is. Yeah, good question. So basically what we did was we figured out, okay, we can identify this stuff in satellite images, and then we scaled it up using machine learning. So we basically were just training this algorithm to identify the red snow and differentiate that from other stuff like that sort of dirty bathtub ring of dust around the glacier. And then the very edge of this image, the blue stuff, that's the blue glacier ice that's been exposed already. And of course, the distribution changes throughout the summer. So here's the top is the true color satellite image. And then the bottom, this is just the glacier outline in white. And you can see the little pink grows and grows and grows throughout the summer, and it matches what we're seeing in the image. So it's basically as the snow is melting at lower elevations, that's exposing the ice, but at the same time, the saturated band of snow is migrating uphill. So the algae are moving up throughout the summer. So we applied this machine learning algorithm to a ton of satellite images, 4 years worth of data throughout all of Western North America. And we were able to produce this range map. And we found in total about 5% of the glaciated area in North America had algae growing on it. So as we did this, some interesting patterns started to emerge. So one thing right away, this is the Pacific Ocean, by the way. And so we're looking, there's British Columbia, BC, there's Yukon, YT, there's Alaska. But there's this sort of coastal gradient, so that it's more white closer to the ocean. And then the red snow is kind of growing on the lee side of the mountain ranges there. We don't really know why this is, but one hypothesis that I like is that maybe the snow is too deep on the coastal side of the range. So the algae, maybe they just can't swim up through the like gargantuan amounts of snow that are growing closer to the coast. Yeah, the color scale only goes up to 20% here, but on some glaciers it was as high as 65% on actually the Bow Glacier. We found that had the highest coverage of algae of any glacier in North America. So 65% of it was covered by algae. Yeah, great question. We don't know. So on one hand, the snow is melting earlier. We know this, but it's also disappearing earlier as well. So actually what we saw, I don't know if you remember, well, some of you likely remember in 2021, we had the heat dome. Maybe it affected more southern British Columbia, but it was here. Okay, all right, yes, thank you. So the snowpack just like was obliterated that year. And we saw, sure enough, that it just like wasn't enough time for the red algal blooms to form. So possibly an indicator that they're losing habitat essentially with the changing climate. Oh yeah, and Goldilocks zone. So another thing was thinking about this: not too hot, not too cold. So in places like the Wrangell St. Elias, that's very high elevation, too cold to get that nice waterlogged snow. But of course, if it's too hot, then the snow will just be gone and there's no snow for the algae to grow on, so you don't get a bloom. And maybe there's a Goldilocks zone with snow depth as well too. Like if it's too deep, they can't swim up. If it's too shallow, it disappears too quickly as well. So, and I never ended up publishing this because a reviewer didn't like my method, but I'll show it to you anyway. So hopefully some other researcher will pick up the thread. But I basically applied this to all glaciers globally, the same algorithm. And we actually see this really striking distribution pattern there's a hot spot in northwestern North America, Greenland, Norway, and Kamchatka in Russia, and not a whole lot of snow algae elsewhere. There's a few patches here and there, but yeah, so I don't really know what's going on there. One possibility is thinking of that Goldilocks zone again. So they like those maritime glaciers where they get a ton of snow in the winter, but then it's nice and hot in the summer. So you get that persistent liquid water throughout the summer. So yeah, more to say on that, but just leave it at that for now. So wrapping up here, when I tell people I study snow algae, they often want to know, so are they good or are they bad? And I usually say something like, well, they're kind of a natural part of the ecosystem, so they're not really good or bad. I guess on one hand, you could think of them as bad for glaciers because, as I was talking about, they're causing snow and ice to melt faster, and that has all sorts of ramifications for Earth's climate. So we might say that's bad. But on the other hand, thinking of geological ages, so algae have been around for like 1,500 million years, and in that time span, Earth has undergone periods when it was like almost completely covered in snow and ice, the like snowball Earth, and then of course the more recent ice ages as well. So maybe in those eras, snow algae was like the best game in town to be able to do your thing on the ice. So they could have been a pretty important part of Earth's biological history there, for all we know. I'm just speculating. And maybe also having, because they're darkening the snow and ice changing, so changing the albedo, the reflectivity of these ice sheets, and having a role in the transition between ice ages as well, possibly. Yeah, so we don't really know the extent to which snow algae are interconnected with ecosystems. For example, one hypothesis I have is as the snow is melting and the algae are deposited on the soil and maybe getting swept downstream into the ponds, that could serve as a fertilizer as they're decomposing throughout the summer. Ocean algae are known to produce these sulfuric compounds that actually have a huge impact on cloud cover in the ocean, so DMS, dimethyl sulfide. And yeah, so the snow algae, we know they're producing all sorts of volatile organic compounds. They smell like watermelon. Possibly they could be having a role on cloud cover in the mountains, which would actually be the opposite of melting because cloud cover is a very good reflector of solar energy. So for all we know. Or you can make the case, like I was saying before, that it's an endangered microbiome that is threatened by the loss of snow and ice. Someone called them living jewels of snow, and I can't think of a better way to describe them. So there's a huge diversity just in a single drop of meltwater, millions of years of coevolution between these algae and bacteria and fungi and little microscopic dudes in there. Complex life cycles, all this is coordinated with the changing of seasons in this really out there, seemingly inhospitable environment. So we often think of these small things as being insignificant, but up in the high alpine and polar snows, these microorganisms shift the energy balance of entire snowfields. And thanks to all the people who made this research possible. And thank you for listening.
Just to go back to the point of when the algae sort of become involved in the water stream that's heading down to rivers and stuff like that, it actually dies once it's in the open water, or is it consumed by other organisms? Like does it have to have the snow and the ice to live?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question for those of you on Zoom was, do the algae survive the transition in the once they get swept downstream by the melting snow and get into the watershed? I don't know the answer to that. Many microbes are capable, at least in like atmospheric transport, of going into a state of dormancy. And so they can survive for like very extended periods in, basically almost up in outer space. So I would think that it's quite possible that they could survive a bit. I would think the limiting factor for them though is that they're really adapted to being on the surface. And what I've found is they tend to sediment out in fresh water. So I think they might not get enough light to photosynthesize if they're sitting once they settle out of the water column. Yes. So this is my favorite question. I'm so glad you asked. So in the 1970s, a medical doctor did a placebo-controlled trial of snow algae eating. Does it make you sick? And he found that no, it doesn't. Ah, yes, that too. Yes, Frank Zappa.
To name 5 species, some people work a long time to name one species. Anyway, so I can you mentioned terraforming, like from the Arctic to the Antarctic, these little blobs of life
way up in the atmosphere. And I had a question about dispersal, and you certainly more than answered. And to really, I hinted at this before you opened your talk, but sort of mega dispersal from planet to planet. And some NASA scientists suspect that these humble creatures are cousins to snow algae, might well survive a trip through space on an asteroid.
Yeah. So for those of you on Zoom, the question was essentially, can snow algae survive in space? And could they have traveled the intergalactic cosmos? Yeah, I don't know. They certainly are capable of this high atmospheric dispersal. I guess there would have to be like a mechanism for them like to get out of Earth's orbit and somehow attach themselves to something, or maybe incoming the other way. I don't know about that. I would think these guys are probably not very well equipped for space travel compared to some other microbes, because they're, as I said before, they're eukaryotes. So they're very large, relatively large, complex organisms that, compared to some of the little bacteria that really, it's not that they're simpler per se, but they're able to form these little spores and just like basically go into a bomb shelter and survive extended periods. So yeah, interesting idea though, for sure.
No, just me.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
a question. Are those organisms unique to the snow environment, or could that same red algae live in a lake or in a river or some other pond somewhere? Or like, do you know that these are snow algae?
Yeah, so the question was, can snow algae survive in other aquatic freshwater environments? And do you know if these are species that are only found in snow? To our knowledge, they can only survive in snow. So this is based on doing lots of genetic sequencing studies, but also sort of what I was saying about they need light, and in my experience and based on like taking like sediment samples of little alpine tarns and stuff, they really just settle out of the water column pretty quickly. So I don't think they'd be very well adapted to survive in a typical freshwater environment in the same way that other algae have their little gas bubbles and they are able to regulate and diurnally move up and down throughout the day.
So the rodents that you show, those are these, you know, same species. Like the ecosystem is pretty much.
Yeah, that's so are the like predators, the rotifers, for example, the same. So I think the rotifers we found, they were a bit more generalist. But that's not to say that there couldn't be specialists within them. Yeah, basically that we didn't sequence deeply enough to answer that question. It's quite possible that these are generalist freshwater that just happen there. More than likely, the smaller guys, the bacteria, and certainly the fungi. The fungi are snow specialists. The two that I showed there. The bacteria, I think, are also snow specialists as well. So they're adapted to run their metabolisms at just about 0 degrees, which is a pretty neat trick to do. So we had to grow them. We got all these like incubators, these little beverage coolers, and we had to keep them at 0 degrees all the time. But we were also blasting them with light as well. So it was kind of a bit of a pickle, but. Does it snow algae? I would say yes. So they're pretty good cloud condensation nuclei, and they actually produce these ice binding proteins that will help facilitate the formation of crystals, especially exterior to the cell. So yeah, they're certainly getting around on wind. They're certainly getting up into the clouds, along with a whole host of other things. The term for it is the aeroterrestrial microbiome. And that's basically all the stuff that we're breathing right now, all the stuff that's coming out of us. It's all getting swept away. If it's and from the dirt or your lawn or whatever. And some of that is traveling quite far distances across the earth, and then maybe landing in a hospitable spot for it to grow again. Yeah, so great question. I am currently in between things. So I was most recently working for Polar Knowledge Canada, doing some climate model validation, looking at meteorological data sets from the Canadian Arctic. Unfortunately, with the government funding freezes, I wasn't able to continue on that for this. In terms of a more broader question so I probably won't be staying in snow algae myself. But yeah, in terms of active stuff that's happening right now, I mean, for example, just one thing that's like a lot of the stuff that I was showing you, we still don't really know what those are. So there's a whole like massive amounts of cool work to be done understanding the different organisms and which ones are different species, or maybe they're a life stage of the same species, and how they're timing themselves. How the heck do they swim up from the base of the snowpack? That's one I would want to study right there.
History. History.
Yeah. So is there a history of snow algae in like core permafrosts? I don't know about permafrosts per se, but I do know there was some work done in the Himalaya coring alpine glaciers there, and they were looking at the different algae that were found at different strata. I don't think they were going super far back on that one, like maybe 100 years, a couple 100 years or something. Um, yeah, that's a really interesting question, and what sort of yeah, like I would like to know how when snow algae evolved, for example, and there are molecular methods that you could use to figure that sort of thing out and how they diverged. But yeah, to my knowledge, that's the only study that was done using core samples of snow algae. But, yeah, so the question was of all the different morphologies we saw tonight, what is there evidence for adaptive functionality for some of those things? Are you talking about like the s- the star shape or yeah, I have no idea. I mean I love the idea that maybe like the stars are like a little worse at rolling or something. The one yeah, some of them have these like little like lassos on them. I have no idea what they're for, but in my mind I like to imagine that they're like for like holding on to dear life to a little ice crystal or something on the top of the snow so it doesn't get swept away by the not water. But yeah, a lot of them, I mean, besides the flagella, and even the flagella, like the four flagella guy, which is really weird, by the way. Like no algae have four flagella. Don't really know why. Oh, yeah. I've never heard of dead mice on a glacier. That's very strange. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, there's a snow algae. There's also all sorts of things like cryoconite holes, which are they're basically like cryoconite is just a little like black sediment that gets deposited. Because it's darker, it melts this little hole, and there's this whole unique little microcosm that's just associated, these species that are only found in these cryoconite holes on glaciers. There's ice algae, totally different from snow algae. They're purple, they're a different shape. And they have their own associated set of communities as well. In terms of the larger stuff, yeah, I've never heard of mammals before in that number on a glacier, but maybe there was something going on. Definitely birds, I've seen a lot on the glaciers for the big stuff, and lots of insects. A lot of the insects I feel like are just like lost souls. You run into like bumblebees on the top of a glacier. You're like, what are you doing up here, dude? There's no flowers. But maybe they're flying up to the top to mate or something like that. So. Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
See, clearly you make efforts to take your science to the streets, including tonight. I see a kid's book in your research. It's the title Watermelon Snow. So
I love it.
You've sort of drawn out all kinds of interesting storylines and left us hanging. Yeah. And that's the beginning of a good story.
Yeah.
So maybe between some of your research projects or as your family blossoms, have kids, just saying. Anyway, so that's what you have to go for it.
Let's talk. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, there's so many questions. There's this like writer Bayo Komalafe who talks about questions as being like a river. There's just infinite amounts of questions, and sometimes a particularly well-placed answer could be like a stepping stone that might situate you out just a little further into the river, and then you can see the questions or new questions from a different perspective or a different angle.
Even started on moss piglets.
I know. Yeah. 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 For sure. Yeah. So white snow. So there are some things that are specialists in white snow. I'm thinking of some of the fungi, the like three-armed bandit guy I showed you, which is not its real name, by the way, is like is found in red snow and white snow as well. So it doesn't seem to be like specific to the more waterlogged, moist snow that the algae really likes. Yeah, there's been a few papers like comparing those communities. Seems like there's a bit of overlap, but there's also some stuff that seems to be a little bit more specific to the algae as well, just because they're such a unique ecosystem. They're little plants, they're producing all of this carbon that can then be accessible to fixing all the carbon and making it accessible to other things as well.
That's it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
As most of the talks are on big wildlife, I think this is just a really fascinating look into the whole ecosystems and the layers of predators and things on such a small scale. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll never be able to look at pink snow quite the same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You really won't want to do it.
Just to end on housekeeping, there's tons of watermelon, snow, here, many other goodies. But thanks to all of us, the food and yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks from several people online.
Really good, Casey.
Yeah.